Truth! How are you?
In better shape than you, fat ass. Fat ass.
The Grand Theft Auto series is one of the world's most popular video game collections. Almost everyone has at least heard of the GTA games, and different people like to associate the series with different things. Some people associate the series with memes like the train mission and Big Smoke's order. Some people might think of all the 11-year-olds screaming to their mics when they're playing GTA Online. Other people might think of all the garbage clickbait GTA videos on YouTube. But usually, the first thing that people think of when they think of Grand Theft Auto is crime. I mean, even the title of the game is a felony, which is kind of telling you something. One of the many missions that really shows that theme of crime is a mission from GTA San Andreas called Are You Going to San Fierro? The mission starts off with CJ arriving at a massive farm owned by this hippie/conspiracy theorist named The Truth. In an earlier mission, Officer Tenpenny, a cop who blackmailed CJ into working for him, requested CJ to pick up a huge shipment of weed from The Truth and bring it directly to him. When CJ arrives on the farm, The Truth tells him that he's packed as much weed as he could fit into his van, which he refers to as the mothership. But right as they're talking, they hear a police helicopter overhead that sees the weed farm and radios in for backup. We find out that this was all set up, and Officer Tenpenny called the cops on CJ and The Truth to get them arrested. The Truth realizes that he's been set up, so he panics and pulls out 2 flamethrowers from under his car. You know, like a normal person would. He then tells CJ to come help him burn all the weed on the farm before the cops get there, instead of, trying to escape from that helicopter. But on the bright side, at least the cops are nice enough to let you know when they're going to arrive. Anyway, after they burn all the weed, CJ and The Truth run over to the van in order to escape. CJ tells The Truth that they can't escape with the helicopter tailing them, so The Truth tells CJ to check the back, and CJ pulls out a fully assembled RPG that The Truth just keeps there for some reason. CJ then takes it, fires, and shoots down the helicopter, allowing for them to make their escape and drive over to their safe house in San Fierro.
That's a lot of damage.
This mission is a perfect example of why people associate the GTA games with crime, because so many crimes were committed. Criminal possession of weapons, murder, arson, driving without using a turn signal, mass drug cultivation, and so much more, making this a pretty classic GTA mission. But the craziest part of the mission was the amount of weed that The Truth had on his farm. Any drug search that requires helicopter support must have been for a massive amount, so for this video, we're going to be looking into The Truth's drug empire by answering a few questions. First of all, how much weed was growing on the farm? Second of all, how much weed was inside The Truth's van? And third, how much was it all worth? We're going to begin by finding the amount of weed that was growing on the farm. To figure that out, let's take a look at the setup on his farm. From what it looks like, The Truth grows his plants in 5 different rectangular rows next to his farmhouse. Each row is set up to be 3 plants by 12 plants, or 36 plants in total. Multiplying that by the 5 rows gives us a total of 180 plants. But, keep in mind, these aren't the only plants growing in The Truth's farm. In addition to that, The Truth also has 4 more rows of 3 plants by 18 plants growing in his field, which gives us 216 plants. So in total, all that adds up to 396 plants. Now it's hard to say exactly how many grams of weed each plant produces because it really varies, but because The Truth is pretty experienced at growing weed outside, it's safe to say that he gets a yield of about 500 grams of weed for each plant on average. Using that metric, a safe estimate would be that The Truth had around 198,000 grams worth of plants growing outside, or a little under 7,000 ounces. But of course, this isn't all the weed that The Truth has. He's also keeping the weed that he grew for CJ inside of his car. In a cutscene before the mission, CJ tells The Truth that there must be 2 tons of weed inside the car, and The Truth responds by telling him there's actually 3 tons, which sounds like an insane amount of weed because it is an insane amount of weed. In fact, I'm not even sure he could fit that much weed into his van. I'm no professional drug trafficker though, so we're gonna have to put this to the test. Let's calculate and see how much weed could fit into The Truth's car. To do that, we need to find the volume of the cargo area in his van. The Truth's van is a custom-painted version of an in-game car known as the Camper, which resembles a Volkswagen Type 2. At first, I was going to compare the Camper to its real-life counterpart and use the Volkswagen Type 2's cargo hold measurement for my calculations, but it turns out that the Camper in GTA San Andreas is actually longer than in the real world, so we can't really do that. To solve this problem, we need to compare the camper to some kind of in-game point of reference that can somehow be measured in the real world. After looking around, I figured that the best point of reference to use would be a bus known as the coach. The reason this bus is a good scale to use is because it's an accurate replica of the Motor Coach Industries 102B3, which comes standard in the United States at 40 feet long, 11 feet high, and 8 feet wide. After comparing the camper to the bus using proportions, relative to the bus, the camper would be around 20 feet long, over 6.5 feet high, and about 6 feet wide. Now this gives us a good idea of the camper's size, but we aren't trying to figure out how big the van is. We're trying to figure out the storage capacity it has. To do that, we have to subtract the areas of the car where there's no storage room and find the volume of that remaining area. The Truth and CJ didn't store anything in the front because that's where they'd be sitting, so we could get rid of the entire front cabin. We also need to get rid of the gap between the floor and the ground, since the wheels keep the car off the ground and that creates a lot of extra space that isn't actually part of the car. Finally, since the camper is based on the Volkswagen Type 2, its engine is actually in the back, which is pretty concerning because that means CJ must have pulled out that RPG straight from the engine block. Because of that, we need to subtract the engine area from the van's total volume as well. The best way to do that is to split up the van into sections, with the bottom right section being the engine area. After doing that and using proportions to find the length of each side, the measurements of the car should look something like this. It isn't perfectly accurate, but it's a pretty close estimate, and that's all we really need. Now we can find the cubic area of the two remaining sections by multiplying the length, the width, and the height of the sections. For example, the volume of this bottom section would be the height times the length times the width of the car, resulting in an area of about 200.5 cubic feet. It seems pretty simple, but here's where things get even more complicated. If you look at the camper from the back, you'll notice that the top of the camper and the bottom of the camper are two completely different sizes. Up here, the camper would be a little over 5 feet wide, but down here the camper would be almost 6 feet wide. This causes a problem when you measure the top section, since the shape of the back face is a trapezoid instead of a rectangle like the bottom section. If we were to just multiply the height, length, and width like we did with the bottom section, we would end up including these two empty triangular spaces in our calculation where you can't really store anything. This would make our calculation completely inaccurate, so we have to make sure that we account for that somehow when we're calculating the cargo space. The easiest way to do that is to find the surface area of the back section of the van and then multiply that by the length of the car. Like I mentioned earlier, the back of the car is roughly a trapezoid shape, so we have to use the formula for the surface area of a trapezoid, which is a plus b divided by 2 times the height, with a and b being the bases. After we plug in the numbers, we can see that the surface area of the trapezoid is about 13.79 square feet. Now we just multiply that by the top section's length, and we get 194.25 cubic feet. So in total, this tells us that the van could hold about 394.75 cubic feet worth of weed. Now that we finally know the volume of the van's storage space, the final step is to find out how much weed could fit inside of the van. I looked around, and according to the White House's Office of National Drug Control Policy, an average brick of compressed marijuana weighs 1,000 grams and measures 8.5 inches by 11 inches by 2.5 inches. This would mean 1,000 grams of weed has a volume of 233.75 cubic inches. Now we convert the volume of the van that we found earlier from cubic feet to cubic inches and divide it by the volume of a brick. This tells us that a little over 2,918 bricks could fit inside of the van. We then multiply the amount of bricks by 1,000 grams because that's how much each brick weighs. This gives us a final amount of 2,918,195 grams of weed, which is equal to over 3.2 tons. So at this point, it looks like my initial hypothesis was completely wrong. The math tells us that we could easily store 3 tons of weed on the Truth's van, and you'll even have some space left over. That's a pretty impressive storage capacity for a van, and it looks like the Truth is putting it to good use. Now that we have proof to say that the Truth had 3 tons of weed on the mothership, it's finally time to figure out how much everything is worth. This part is impossible to put an exact number on because the price of marijuana varies depending on quality, location, and if you're buying in bulk or not. The average street price of weed in California today is about $256.42 for an ounce. Assuming that the average price of weed rose at the same rate as inflation, we can estimate that the average price of an ounce of weed back in 1992 would be about $146.80. The Truth has around 3 tons, or 96,000 ounces of weed in his van, and he burned 6,984.25 ounces of weed on his farm. This would mean that the Truth has around $14.1 million worth of weed in his van, and he ended up burning over $1 million worth of weed. Don't forget though, this was back in 1992, so we have to adjust it for inflation to give us a good perspective of how much that would really be today. Converting the money tells us that $14.1 million in 1992 had the same buying power as $24.6 million today. Using that same metric, $1,025,000 had the same buying power as $1.8 million would today. So in total, the present value of all the weed that he had is equal to $26.4 million today. This would put him in the world's richest 250,000 people, or the top 0.005%. So in conclusion, this man right here was worth the equivalent of more than $26 million. This video might have taught some people a lesson about not judging a person from the way they look, but the only lesson I learned from all this is that being a weed farmer is insanely profitable, and I should probably drop out of college.
Thanks, man. Look, here go your paper.
Ah, the karmic circle closes.